It's a great privilege to have Esther Dyson with us today as our keynote speaker, and it's really an honor to be able to introduce her to this community. About 10 years ago, I joined Hillary Hatch to build a company called VitalScore. Esther was our first investor, our first check, and it changed everything about the company. Words will never describe my gratitude and the impact that she had on me as a founder, as well as an investor. And everyone that knows her shares that sentiment. She is one of a kind. As a renowned entrepreneur with a forward-thinking mindset, investor, author, visionary in technology and healthcare, Esther has paved the way for innovation and collaboration in health, AI, education, policy, space exploration, and global well-being. She challenges conventional approaches through her efforts to shift focus from treating illness to fostering resilience. And her dedication to promoting long-term health outcomes through Wellville is truly inspiring, and it gives us all hope for the future of health. So she's agreed to give a few prompts, as she will call it, share a bit about herself, and maybe she'll even tell us about these incredible astronaut photos. And then she's going to take live Q&A from our audience, so please add your questions to the Q&A section. Beyond her many accomplishments, she's also a mentor and an advocate for female founders, constantly championing the next generation of women innovators. So thank you, Esther, so much for being here. And it means the world to all of us to hear from you.
Thank you. After that intro, I think I should just be quiet. So good afternoon, good morning, everybody. And I will tell you just a little bit of background, and then I'd much rather answer your questions, because answering questions is more interesting than repeating a speech you've written for so many people already. In a sense, I need to do not a land acknowledgement, but a luck acknowledgement. I grew up very privileged. My father worked for Oppenheimer. You know, I knew Nobel Prize winners and stuff like that, but I knew very little about the real world. And sort of following in the footsteps of science, I started asking questions. I went to live in England the year I was 13. And among other things there, I spent a fair amount of time with my aunt, who used to work for the National Health Service in England. She was what they called an almoner. It was essentially a doula, and her specialty was unmarried moms. And probably the way they would describe those unmarried moms at that time would be shameless hussies. And her job was to guide them, kind of like some of the companies we heard this afternoon, to deal with a society that rejected them, to try and be healthy for their babies, to try and get through the birthing process, maybe reconcile with their families, or find some way to survive in a world that was pretty hostile. So that piece of my life lives with me for many reasons. And when she died in the early 2000s, a bunch of the kids whose births she had assisted at showed up at her funeral. And that whole transition of generations and so forth is in some sense what I'm still working on. So a few other things, and then please just ask questions about what interests you. Wellville started as a 5-year, 5-community, 5-metrics contest. And I was going to get funding for it. As I said, I've been extremely lucky. I made a huge amount of money in the stock market just by being lucky. I also, you could say I was unlucky. I was, as you noticed, on the board of 23andMe. And financially, that didn't work out so well, but it was an amazing education. I learned a lot about genetics. The space training, I learned a lot about space travel. And again, you need to be lucky to be able to do this, but my motto is never take a job you wouldn't do for free, but then try and get paid. And by being able to follow that, I've had an amazing life and learned a ton, and I'm still doing stuff. So Wellville, I was going to go out and raise money for that, but it was too weird because we weren't focused on medical care. The way it started was that there's this company called Real Age. I can't really see a show of hands, but its business model is selling vitamin supplements. It asks you about your social determinants of health in a sort of polite way. Do you live with a partner? Do you have pets? Do you eat well? It doesn't go into the tougher social determinants of health like poverty and racism and parents who were addicted or absent. I will say I'm a childless cat lady, but without a cat, but I care a lot more about parentless children in whatever sense that might be. Anyway, Charlie Silver, who ran Real Age, eventually sold it to Hearst, who sold it to ShareCare. But what was interesting was who he sold his first company to. And that was Jiffy Lube, oil changes, as in maintenance. And it occurred to me, maintenance, we should maintain human beings better, because so much of healthcare is just a repair job for things that shouldn't have happened. And so much of what we were hearing about today is about keeping people healthy, whether it's babies or bones, rather than fixing things that went wrong. And that in a sense was the purpose behind Wellville. As I mentioned, it was too weird to be funded. We weren't going to hand out money. We weren't going to come in with a program or a playbook. We were going to basically be counselors and advisors to 5 communities that wanted to become more healthy places for people to prosper. And so the first thing I learned was 5 years is not long enough to earn people's trust. So it ended up being 10 years. It's ending at the end of this year. The 5 communities didn't want to compete. They wanted to collaborate and learn from one another. So it was not a contest. We couldn't raise the money for a prize. And ultimately, the metrics are useful, and we are collecting some data, but what we were really trying to build was less a clinical trial of some precisely defined intervention, but more to help 5 communities fulfill their own desires, use their own intrinsic motivation. We learned quickly telling people what to do if they're not fundamentally interested in doing it it's not the right way to either raise children or help a community come together. So that's probably enough for prompts. One more. At the end of this, my next challenge is going to be to write a book not about Wellville per se, because that's kind of like writing a book about marriage by writing about your own marriage. There's just too much detail, too much personality. It's more, what did I learn, with some anecdotes that could be applied more generally. And second, as I mentioned, Wellville is unsustainable. I love what we were doing. I think it was very helpful, but you're not going to find a lot of lucky people like me funding this kind of thing all over the place. And ultimately, we need collective investment, not spending, on the health and well-being of our future generations. So I'm going to let you do the questions, Susan.
Esther, there are a lot of questions. I'm going to just so people know, because I see many of them, I'm going to do the first question from Anne Klein, followed by Avanlee Christine, and then Chris Brown. So the first one from Anne Klein is addiction is a huge issue in many U.S. communities, destroying families, and it seems to be unstoppable. So what have you learned from Wellville or elsewhere? What can we do differently, and how do we address this?
I love this question. I mean, I hate the thing, but yeah, something like hate the sin, love the sinner. I first learned about addiction well before Wellville, and in fact, starting pretty much in Russia, which I was visiting. I learned Russian in high school for a bunch of reasons and started going there in 1989, and I saw the impact of despair and a sense of uselessness, a sense of powerlessness, and the rampant alcoholism. I talked to one of my friends, about smoking and drinking so much. And he said, "Well, Esther, we don't like the life so much, we want to live so long." And in a sense, I would call addiction negligent suicide. But what I also learned about it over the years, and also in Wellville, is addiction. So ironically, I know some of you are interested in my investments. I have 2 couples counseling companies. One is about you and your food, and the other is about you and your money. Addiction is about a toxic relationship with something. It could be a substance, and there's physical dependency, but addiction itself is more this craving for relief from something, whether it's gambling or a drug or food, or for some people shopping, and it kind of takes over your mind, and it shortens both your vision going backwards and forwards. You've probably alienated your family. You really have you're so focused on relieving that addiction, you aren't really thinking about your future, and it's not good for you, but you do it anyway because you need it now. And you also know you should behave better, or your family's going to abandon you, you're going to lose your job. And somehow that relief isn't coming, but you're just caught in this. And it's not just about poor people in poor communities. It's also community organizations addicted to short-term grants. And again, they have no vision for the future. We need the money now to pay our part-time coordinator. And whatever these guys want us to do, we'll do it for a year. And, then they'll either say it's successful, so they're going to do something more innovative, or they'll say it wasn't successful, so they're not going to fund us anymore. And venture capitalists get addicted not to sustainable companies, which I hope is what you all are building, but to exits. And politicians, of course, get addicted to votes and to staying in office and to being surrounded by people who tell them how great they are. And then there are longevity billionaires who, even though they think that they want to live forever, right now they're addicted to sort of almost punishing themselves and not even enjoying their lives by chasing this dream of, I got to last forever. And so addiction, what do you do about it? I mean, there's lots of useful things you can do with short-term treatments, but fundamentally they're trying to give people back their sense of purpose and of human connection. The thing human beings most need is to be needed by other humans. And if you look at the movie Her, which got a lot of press recently, courtesy of Sam Altman and OpenAI, the problem with that love affair between Spike Jones, I think, and his girlfriend, played by Scarlett Johansson's voice, he discovered that she had 1,500 lovers and didn't need him. Even though she could pay as much attention to him as he wanted in terms of time, he didn't get the percentage, and he knew she was fine without him. People need that sense of purpose, of mattering. It's the difference between an influencer's audience, which they count in numbers, and the members of your family, who are each unique individuals that care about you. I mean, it's not quite that simple, obviously, but that's what I learned about addiction.
That's amazing. I hope you see all of the emojis and the love going on. People are just really so grateful to hear your words. We have a question from Avanlee Christine, who is the CEO of Avanlee Care, and I know you're the chair of her company. I have the privilege of being an investor alongside you. She'd like to ask about how important is securing the future of the care economy, especially when it comes to our aging population, and how do you see unpaid caregivers evolving? What strategies could health plans adapt to better support our unpaid care workers?
Okay, so first I'll talk about the meta, and then I'll talk a little, just a bit about sort of the business. So the meta is everybody's fussing about training our AIs. We got to train them to do this and that and the other, and we do. And the great thing about them is they're very scalable once you train them. And there's lots of issues around embedding bias into the AIs because they basically copy human beings. There's a lot of issues around unexplainable AIs. And honestly, I think unexplainable humans are an even worse problem. And so the solution to this is training our babies, not training them to do things AIs can do, but training them to be better humans, to have that ability to connect that I talked about. That's the opposite of addiction, to think long term, to care, to notice, to have empathy, and to need one another. And this is what we kind of lost in so many ways in schools. I mean, it's not just home ec, but sort of the civic and social parts of school, not just the arithmetic and the writing and reading and your history lessons. It's training a workforce. When you come into a company, interns do a lot of work that can be done by AIs, but the most important work they do is being part of the business, learning from their bosses, communicating with their peers, and having that human creativity and so forth and so on. And now we have a society where people are getting disconnected and it's fragmented, and we need more people to do that human work, whether it's paid or unpaid, of being there for one another, being family, but also being neighbors, showing up at the PTA, being human to other humans, and socializing and so forth. So that's the bigger problem in a sense. And then there's the problem of so many families that are fractured. We do now have children whose parents are missing or themselves have not, quote, being trained to be good parents. And this is not training out of a book, it's being trained by human beings. And it's lonely elders who are disconnected from their communities and who often don't live with their kids. And Avanlee Care's model is primarily focused on it's such a huge market and there's a lot of companies in it. We have a very specific but large focus, which is the kids of remote parents who need support, who are probably on Medicare or Medicare Advantage. They need appointments scheduled. They need food ordered from Walmart, which is something you can do specifically through Avanlee Care. They need remote monitoring of various kinds. They need to be reminded to take their meds. They need to get their visits to the doctor, not just scheduled, but call the Uber or the local taxi or whatever the local arrangement is for getting people to doctors and so forth and so on. And meanwhile, these caregivers are themselves not being cared for. I remember talking to the wife of it's long and complicated, but the wife of a man who subsequently died. And she said, my kids come home and they ask, how's dad? And they never ask, how am I? And, dad has me to love him, but what about me? And she feels guilty for asking that. And at the same time, she desperately needs some care herself. And we try to support both sort of the tangible, arrange the appointments with the doctor, and the intangible, have a community around you, help you connect with your family. So, okay, I've been talking to mom all week. It's time for my little brother to call her, or it's time for my little brother to drive over from the next town and help her fix her washing machine, or, whatever it is. But somehow providing a support network, just as we were talking about in mothers need support, all kinds of people need peer-to-peer support, and adding in, again, that sense that you are not alone. Not only do you have a purpose, you have people who need you, but you also have people who will assist you, because the work you're doing is so important. And from Medicare Advantage's point of view, an unpaid caregiver that loves the patient, I mean, what a deal. Support them up the wazoo. And that's basically what we're talking about.
That's amazing. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Chris Brown asked a question about if you could describe any serious challenges you've had with some of your portfolio companies and how the character of the personnel involved played a role.
I mean, the serious challenges are mostly people who go off the reservation one way or another. And just like what I said earlier about Wellville, I'm not going to name any names, but everything from people who get into fights, whether it's out in the world or a founding team that ends up not working together well. So I'll tell you a story of my own. This is, I had a newsletter and a conference about tech for 25 years, and this was a few years in. And as I said, the purpose of this company wasn't really to make anybody rich. It was my own education, plus, helping the industry develop. So it was small, and we weren't going for growth. We were like 5 or 6 people, and I had dropped my computer in Russia, and its disk drive had been damaged, and I brought it back home and asked one of the team, could you take it and get it repaired? And after 3 days, my CEO, because I also believe being CEO actually is not the best job. Being the person who does all the fun stuff and having the CEO run the company I was very happy doing that, but I owned the company. So after about 3 days, the CEO comes in. She's still a friend. And she said, Esther, this is kind of awkward, but we really are trying to get your computer fixed. And you seem to think that, we don't care or something. I mean, just be nicer. And I was shocked because I know for a fact I didn't say you're stupid or anything like that to anybody, but clearly I was grumpy and complaining and, and I realized, oh my God, number one, I've been behaving really badly. And 2, she's terrified of telling me that. And it's like 5 people. It wasn't as if I was Elon Musk handing out $1 million bonuses or anything. I've always remembered that and tried to look for people who wanted to hear the truth rather than, always wanted to be CEO. So there's the best kind of investor wants to solve a problem. It's not, I have the solution, because then they're clinging to the solution. Most companies start out with some notion of a solution, and 3 years later, they've pivoted, they've changed it, they've brought in a new design team or something. But the ability to change and to focus on the mission rather than, I know I'm right and we're just going to do this, is extremely important. I'm trying to think of other bad mistakes or, but it's so much about character and mission, because the problems and the solutions, people can copy them. What they can't copy is a dedicated team that will then move beyond where they were, as opposed to the copiers who just keep copying somebody who figured it out first.
Wonderful. Well, we have time for one more question. And Esther, there are a lot of questions for our audience that we haven't been able to get to you. So Jerry and Ainsley, if you can help me record these just to send them over to Esther.
And send them to me. I'd be happy to be helpful afterwards.
You're amazing. So we have a question that kind of it piggybacks a little bit on what we were just talking about, because I think a lot of what we've talked about today is the unmet need. And I think a lot of our founders are looking for investment. So what are the 3 key elements that an investor looks for when considering supporting a startup?
Okay. So first, there's a big difference between angel investors and investors who invest other people's money. So as an angel investor, I don't need to apologize for losing people's money. I might need to acknowledge my own carelessness or something like that, but I can afford to take risks that a professional investor just doesn't want to. And so I can take risks on people. I can take risks on things. I mean, some companies are sort of like, well, would I fund this if it was a charity? In that case, and it's a for-profit, so it might even be self-sustaining, even better. But if you're investing other people's money, you can't really do that. But it's sort of more, and I always focus on again, people differ, but I'm looking for something that's useful and ideally not redundant. Because if someone's doing it already, bless them, and they should do it better, or I should fund that company or something. I'm looking for things that I think are fundamentally honest business models. What they say in Britain is it does what it says on the tin, and that are straightforward about what they're trying to do. They're not kind of some devious business model or other, which is one reason I like health more than health care. Again, the creation of healthy people, babies, elder people, versus, oh yeah, we'll do the repair job, but we sort of have an interest in a lot of people needing to be fixed. I want to give people the resilience to not need most of healthcare. And believe me, there's no problem. Healthcare will continue because it is needed. But the way to reduce healthcare costs is to reduce the need for healthcare, not to stiff doctors and underpay nurses and doulas and so forth.
Well, thank you so much, Esther. We're going to be presenting our awards in a minute or two, and I want to invite all of our finalists and the sponsors to start coming to the stage. And I wonder if you have any closing words for us. It's been just such an honor to have you here. Thank you so much.
Closing words. I should have thought of that one. Don't be scared. Do what you believe in. A lot of people are scared of, there are things they're scared of that don't want to think about. Think about them and ask yourself, well, how bad is that? Will I still be alive? Will I still be able to get another job? So many people are kind of bound by, oh, that would be terrible. And if you're going to lose your job, if you're going to lose your life, if you're going to be thrown out of town, that's true. But life gives you second chances. And so do what you really believe in, but then don't be scared to follow through on what you believe in.
Amazing. Thank you, Esther. Again, it's been an incredible privilege. I think you're going to see a lot of questions in the chat, and we're going to get all of the questions that are in the Q&A over to you as well. And it's really been a privilege. And we know how busy you are, and it means the world that you were here today.